So, I'm not here to argue whether giant trees did exist or didn't exist. I think most of you can make up your own minds about that. So, for entertainment purposes and for the sake of this presentation, let's just pretend that they did exist. Let's consider the hypothesis and ask the question, okay, if these structures were giant trees, why do they look like they were cut down? Now, ordinarily, you wouldn't ask that question until you were able to prove that they were giant trees to begin with. But let's just say that they were and see if what I'm about to present makes any sense. Now, take a moment to consider the magnitude of such trees. A single tree that dwarfs the tallest redwood today would have been so massive that a person could walk through its trunk like a cathedral. Entire civilizations might have lived under its canopy or even climbed its branches. These weren't ordinary trees, they were cosmic structures, living monuments that connected the earth to the sky. And yet, when you look at the landscapes today, the flat-topped mesas, or the enormous stumps, the petrified logs, it's clear something changed for a reason. The idea that these giant trees of the antediluvian world were intentionally cut down opens the door to a far stranger possibility, one that would connect these ancient forests to legends of beings so massive and powerful they might have needed these trees as a means to survive. You see, what would be the reason to cut them down? Who or what stood to gain from their removal? This is where history, myth, and mystery begin to connect. And the story of the giant trees becomes far more than just a tale of the natural world. Perhaps a reminder that in the end, there is no escaping judgment. When you look at certain landscapes, flat-top mesas, towering buttes, or column-like formations like Devil's Tower, it's easy to assume you're just seeing the work of erosion over millions of years. The idea is, over time, through a combination of mineralization and catastrophic events, the organic matter of these trees turned to stone, leaving behind stumps and columns that we now interpret as purely geological formations. Geologically speaking, a mesa is a type of landform that looks like a flat-topped hill or small plateau with steep, often cliff-like sides. The word mesa actually comes from Spanish meaning table, because they look like giant tables rising above the landscape. There are several types of mesas, and there are several elements to the geological explanation. But the main idea is that you have layers of rock, isolation, and erosion leaving behind the mesa. Now, the geological explanation for mesas make sense on paper, but when you really scrutinize it, a few flaws, or at least unanswered gaps, start to show up. First, many of them have this uniform flatness. Erosion is usually messy, uneven, and unpredictable. But many mesas and buttes around the world are strikingly flat, almost like they were sliced off with precision. If erosion were the only factor, you'd expect more jagged, inconsistent tops rather than broad, level tabletops. And you do have that in some instances. Second is the scale and distribution. Some of these formations are massive and isolated, rising straight up from the surrounding land. Geologists say these are the remains of larger plateaus, but the question remains, why do so many look almost identical across many different regions of the world? It seems oddly consistent for random erosion processes. Third, if these formations are millions of years old, erosion should have worn them down far more drastically, especially in harsh climates like deserts where wind and sand constantly blast the rock. Their persistence and symmetry over such long time scales raises questions about whether erosion alone is enough to explain them. So now, when we look at the ancient tree theory, there's another layer to this when you start looking at myths and legends from cultures around the world. Many of these stories speak of a world tree, a cosmic entity that literally connected heaven, earth, and the underworld. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil is described as a massive ash tree whose roots reach into the depths of the underworld, while its branches hold up the heavens. When we start talking about giant trees, it's hard not to think about the beings that might have lived alongside them. And that brings us to the Nephilim. Not only that, but we know there is evidence of giant animals and insects as well. Now here's the thing. Imagine a world where the trees themselves were as massive as mountains. It's easy to see why some theorists suggest a connection. What if these enormous trees were something the Nephilim could interact with in a practical sense? They could climb them with ease, use them as vantage points, or even hollow them out to create living spaces. A tree of that size would provide shelter, storage, protection, almost like a natural ark rising above the floods, a sanctuary for beings of their size. The theory goes further. Some suggest that these giants may have used the trees strategically when the floodwaters came. Instead of seeking refuge in simple rafts or boats, they could have utilized the tallest, sturdiest trees as survival mechanisms, using their strength to modify the trunks and branches to suit their needs. So, what if the falling of these trees was a deliberate act to prevent the Nephilim from surviving the flood? The biblical narrative focuses on the destruction of humanity and the giants, but maybe divine intervention went even further. By removing the very structures that giants could have used as arks or safe havens, their chances of survival were erased completely. In this scenario, the trees weren't just trees, they were lifelines, and cutting them down was part of the plan. So, who would cut them down? The angels of heaven, maybe? In several ancient texts, there are references to giant trees that touch the sky. The best example is probably in the Epic of Gilgamesh in Tablet 5. As Gilgamesh and Enkidu face Humbaba in the cedar forest, the battle is more than what it seems. This is more like a cosmic battle. During the fight, Enkidu urges Gilgamesh to strike harder, warning that their actions are tied to a powerful, almost cataclysmic force. And I quote, "to send the flood to crack the whip." And that line suggests that the conflict in the forest is linked to divine or natural judgment. As they battle, the earth itself reacts. Mountains like Mount Hermon and Lebanon split. The clouds darken, and a rain of death falls like fog. These descriptions tie the act of confronting Humbaba to apocalyptic imagery, or the flood. In the text, it reads, "They cut through the cedar. While Gilgamesh cuts down the trees, Enkidu searches through the Irmazalu." Enkidu addressed Gilgamesh, saying, "My friend, we have cut down the towering cedar whose top scrapes the sky." The scale of the formations we see today are the remains of something extraordinary. They wouldn't just be trees, they were monuments to a lost world, evidence of an environment and a species that goes beyond our understanding. The thought that the giants might have used them to rise above the flood, literally and figuratively, adds a layer of tension to the landscape. Every stump, every mesa could be the remains of what was once a colossal forest. Not all trees, not even most trees, but a few of them, cut down for reasons we can only speculate about, leaving us to wonder about the forces at play in that ancient world. And that brings us to the ultimate mystery. Were these trees destroyed purely by the passage of time, or was there intent behind their destruction? If they were, in fact, trees, could they have been deliberately cut down to prevent giants from reaching above the floodwaters, to erase knowledge, or to enforce a cosmic judgment? The evidence is buried in the earth, in the petrified stumps in the shape of the mesas, leaving us with questions that may never be fully answered. All that remains are these witnesses, monuments to a forgotten battle in a world that once was. And they once stood in the landscape as reminders of a history that is part natural, part divine, and still a mystery. At least for now. Everyone, please click the thumbs up button and like this video. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Everyone have a wonderful day, and until next time, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon.